Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya. Is it just me who thinks that sounds like two posh people saying hello and like inviting each other around? Oh, come by, oh, come by. Anyway, where were we? Oh, hello. Welcome to this week's vid. This week we're looking at worship. It's part of our series of living life to the max. And if you want to have that John 10:10 life to the max, worship has to be a big part of the culture that you want to create around yourself. Worship is a word that's used quite a lot, and it's not always very positive. We can worship things that really aren't helpful to us at all. And the Bible calls that idolatry, where we put other things in the place of God. And there's a bit of a tendency with that if we don't have God as the number one priority in our life, pretty soon he's sliding right down the list of our priorities, and soon he's not even in the top 10. And then we wonder why our Christian life is hard, why things are happening to us that we feel powerless, we get down, we get demotivated, and we can even then turn around and blame God. But actually the issue is that we haven't put God in the rightful place as the number one priority in our lives. Now, worship isn't just about singing songs. Worship is about putting God in his rightful place in every area of our lives. It's about how we spend our money. It's about how we invest our time. It's about the words we use to speak to other people that show that for us, God is worthy of our honor and praise. And of course, worship is something that really should permeate every part of our lives, because every part of our lives should be given over to God. He should be our priority in the choices and the decisions that we make. Worship is such an important thing, and we can see examples of that in the story of Cain and Abel, that they both bring sacrifices to God that are acceptable sacrifices. There's nothing wrong with them, but the attitude of the giver is the problem. And we see the first recorded murder in the Bible because somebody didn't have the right heart attitude in how they worship God. And that just led to chaos and jealousy, and in the end, murder. The Bible uses a lot of different words for the word that we translate as worship. Some of them involve the idea of prostrating yourself, of literally lying face down in that position of surrender. Others involve a sort of joyful celebration of who God is and what he's done for us. They all talk about giving esteem and value to God, because that's really what worship is all about. It's about acknowledging God's rightful place. And although worship isn't just about singing, far, far from it, I do actually want to focus today on that sort of worship, on that kind of response to God, often that happens in public, but can happen in private as well, in our worship, in our praise. There's a fantastic story in 2 Samuel verse 6, where David, the king, is bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. And you can read in that chapter that it's kind of been a bit of a mess bringing it in. They've made some mistakes. But finally, they're at this point where they bring the ark in, and David is leading the procession, dressed in priestly robes, and he is dancing like nobody's business. And his wife is looking on, and she's probably thinking, he's the king. He should be dignified. He should, be behaving with a bit more decorum, behaving a bit more correctly for somebody in his position. David doesn't care. He's just so joyful about who God is and what God has done. He's so incredibly excited about what that Ark of the Covenant represents for him and his people that he just can't help himself. He just goes for it in worship. And when she challenges him about it later, he says to his wife, I'll be more undignified than this. If that's what it takes to show God what he means to me, I'll be undignified. I won't care what other people think of me. You might have heard the expression, dance like there's nobody watching. For me, I'm really self-conscious about dancing. I've got to be honest with you. I'm not a dancer. It's just something that really I don't enjoy. But sometimes people say to you, oh, you should dance like there's no one watching. David wasn't into that idea at all. David knew people were watching, he just didn't care. David danced because he knew that it would delight the Lord. That's why he danced the way he danced, because he knew it would delight the Lord, and he wanted to show God how he felt about him and how worthy God was of his honour and his respect and his sort of celebration of God's character. And for many of us, when we're involved in worship, it's very easy to be self-conscious, very easy to think, what do other people think of me? And very easy for us actually to be judgmental about how other people worship. I often used to wonder when I was in church and people would behave in a very different way. The church I became a Christian in wasn't really into raising hands in worship at the time or anything like that. In fact, on one occasion, somebody raised their hand in worship and somebody came and hung a coat on their hand in the middle of the service. Can you believe that? Because they had such a problem with how the person was worshipping that they just felt they had to do something to suppress it and to stop it. Well, that's a bad reaction. And actually, it will be a reaction that affected everybody very badly in that situation. And I used to wonder whether sometimes an act of worship was just accepting what somebody else felt they had to do at the time. Just accepting that some people at certain times need to make a noise that you wouldn't feel comfortable making or something like that. Worship is such a personal thing, even when we're surrounded by a group of people. If we were in a regular church service, you'd see people worshipping in so many different ways. Don't worry about them, and they shouldn't worry about you. Express yourself to God the way that you feel you should. We're not doing it to show off, we're not doing it to shock people, and we're not doing it to entertain people. Our worship is for God's pleasure and for us to be able to express how worthy God is. And that is unbelievably important for us to do. We should worship and rejoice in God regardless of how we feel. And that can seem like a really difficult thing, particularly if you're in a situation that you're really struggling with. But actually there's a good reason for the Bible to say this. Look at it this way. God is always going to be worthy of praise. No situation or circumstance is going to change that. God is always worthy of praise. If we forget that and we don't allow God to have the priority in our lives that he wants, the effect on us is not positive. We know that. So what do we do then when we don't feel like praising? What do we do when we don't feel like worshipping? Well, the simple answer to that is we do it anyway. There have been a lot of times in my life, and I'm sure that some of you will feel the same, where the last thing I wanted to do was go into church and sing songs, see other people and smile. But I made a decision that that's exactly what I was going to do. I went into church and I started to sing. And sometimes when I started to worship, I didn't really feel like doing it. But something changes when we worship. You often hear about people being healed in worship, people being changed in worship, having a completely different perspective on a situation after they've worshipped. Was it the song that changed them? I don't think any song lyrics are that good. What changed was they connected with God. Their worship allowed them to get through all of the rubbish that had accumulated. It allowed them to connect with God in a way that brought them some breakthrough and some relief from the situation they were in. And the crazy thing is that God's always wanting to help us and step into situations. But very often we don't invite him. And very often we're not living in that kind of relationship with him where we can know that he's for us. We've allowed ourselves to be robbed, if you like, of who God is. So that's it. Worship to the max. Life can have some ups and downs, but God is always there, always the same, and always worthy of our praise. And yeah, praise him in every way. Praise him with how you give your time, with the words that you say, with the way that you treat people. All of those things are acts of worship. But I want to encourage you to sing. I want to encourage you to listen to worship music when you're feeling down. You know, I often, when I'm struggling, put some headphones on and listen to some worship tracks, and I find that it just changes not just my mood, because moods can be, up and down, can't they? But it actually changes my perspective. I come away from situations feeling different. I remember a few months ago feeling really down about a lot of the things that were happening. I was really struggling with it. And I put on a CD by a band called the Wren Collective, and they've got a song on there called Rejoice. And it's about that idea, of continually rejoicing whatever the circumstance. And I put my headphones on and I turned the song on and listened to it. And at the end of the song, I didn't just feel better, I had a completely different perspective on the things that were going on, completely different. And those things that were bothering me just haven't affected me the same way since, because I was just able to see a little bit more of God's perspective on the issues that I was struggling with. So rejoice, worship. Don't worry about what anybody else thinks. Don't even worry about what you think, because sometimes we can be the biggest barrier to really worshipping God the way He wants us to. Understand that God knows who you are and He loves you how you are, and you can worship how you are, and God will find that so pleasing because He loves you so much. Worship to the max. Take care. See you soon.